Good evening, class. Today we are going to be learning about folk literature. So make sure you get excited, pay attention, take some notes, and enjoy. Folk literature was born through oral tradition, and this means that folk tales were born through communication. People would sit around a campfire and they would tell stories, and then the people who heard the stories would tell the stories, and it would go on and on and on. Because of this, there are no known authors. No one knows where the story started. There's also folk literature from every culture. So there's Indian, African, and so many more. So one type of folk literature is folk tales. And folk tales are short stories that have been passed down from generation to generation. These include cumulative, Pourquoi, Beast, Trickster, Noodlehead or Numbskull, realistic, and fairy tales. My two favorite folk tales are cumulative and trickster tales, and I really like cumulative tales because in the story they'll start and then they'll repeat themselves and then more events are going to happen. So an example of this would be Gobble You Up, which is a folk tale about a willy jackal, and the willy jackal is too lazy to hunt for his own food, so he decides to eat animals that he sees. So first he eats his friend, who's a crane. Well, actually first he eats his friend's fish, and then he eats his friend, the crane. And then he goes on to eat all these other animals. And as he's doing this, he sings. So he'll eat an animal, and then he'll sing. And then the song, obviously, will get added because he'll keep repeating what he says. So I like that repetitiveness to cumulative tales. And then I also really like trickster tales because in trickster tales, there's a character that's able to outsmart all the other characters. Sometimes in trickster tales, the trickster's actually being good in a way, but then sometimes it's not always the case. So example of a trickster tale would be Zumo, which is about a rabbit, and he's able to outsmart everyone. The next type of folk literature is tall tales, and tall tales have a lot to do with exaggeration. They are sometimes based on actual people, otherwise other times they're based on lumberjacks, sailors, or cowboys. Pourquoi tales answer questions or give explanations for the way things are, particularly in nature. Beast tales are stories with animals that usually represent humans, such as the folk tale of Three Billy Goats. Noodlehead or Numbskull tales are humorous stories where the characters are not very smart. They oftentimes make lots of mistakes in the story. Fables are stories that are meant to teach a lesson and usually conclude with a moral. Realistic tales usually connect to a historical event or a figure in history. And a really good one, fairy tales, of course, are the most magical of talking animals, witches, and magical objects. It's also a favorite for children. The next type of folktale is myths and religious stories, and myths help explain nature, so every culture has their own myths, and they're also a way of showing spiritual aspects. And then religious stories are derived from currently practiced myths. The next folktale is legends. And legends share stories of historical figures, such as saints, kings, and heroes. And oftentimes, these saints, kings, and heroes actually did exist, but they're in the retelling of the stories, it's just really embellished.
Some qualities in determining traditional folklore include having no known or single author, so it originated orally and is told from generation to generation. It involves magic or talking animals and is usually fantastic in nature. Character development is also lean and spare, as is the case in Cinderella. We are hardly told about how she feels about the ill treatment from her stepmother and stepsisters, or how she feels about her new fortune, or any of her interests. We know little about her, so we would consider her to be a rounded character. Even her physical appearance is hardly talked about in the story. Characters themselves in traditional folk are typically symbolic of human traits such as good, greed, or even evil. This is to be considered single-faceted characters, and they typically do not change throughout the story. In folk, nuances of life are left out of the story to reveal basic components such as love, fear, jealousy, or mercy. Since these are fundamental human characteristics and motivations, traditional stories are considered to be universal and held true around the world. They are sometimes challenged as being inappropriate for children. Some critics fear fairy and folk tales will lead children to be out of touch with reality or even will breed violence. Yet much of the violence involves punishment of the truly evil villains. Others worry some traditional stories will frighten children, causing distress or even nightmares. Yet traditional folk is so far removed in time and place with characters such as witches and dragons that they prove to be less frightening than realistic stories. One other criticism surrounding traditional tales is that they are a waste of time. However, many see them as providing a message of hope for children. Some examples of well-known folktale authors or retailers include Marcia Brown, who did Stone Soup, Cinderella or the Little Glass Slipper, Once a Mouse, and Shadow. Another one is Verda Ardema, best known for Why Mosquitoes Buzz in People's Ears, a West African tale, Bringing the Rain to Capita Plain, Tales from the Story Hat, and Kwai and the Kola Nuts, a tale from Liberia.
Hi everybody, I'm going to be talking a little bit about why this genre is so critical and what exactly makes it so important. What do we use to determine quality and things like that. So how we determine if a book is a good example of this genre. Usually success is obtained in overwhelming odds. Someone's very poor and they become wealthy. They spin straw into hay, for example. There's usually typically themed books, so you want to look for those things, rewards of mercy and kindness and perseverance. Usually they also do justice for like punishment of evil and the power of love. They like to share a lot of those things in folk literature. Settings are usually established quickly and they're always in a distant past, so a very long time ago in a distant land far, far away, that kind of thing. So what we would do to evaluate for quality within the genre, you want to look for rich imagery and dreamlike quality when you're looking through the pictures, and as you're reading through the text, you want to look for masterful language. There's 4 qualities that the textbook had referred to, just typical let's pretend type of books. There are some that develop a capacity for belief, and they had spoke about how that was so important because it helps youth develop something to look forward to, and once they built that deep belief, then it's hard for them to ever go back on anything. These books promote those types of belief by telling their story, and the ability to work on our emotions and build hope. So all of these stories that come word of mouth over a long period of time, they all do these things, and they're all equally important to the genre. I had an example from one of my favorite books, and it's actually written by the author that I chose to study. Her name is Margot Zemock, and actually the title is It Can Always Be Worse. And in this example, in the beginning of the book, they talk about how they're in a hut and it's really tiny and there's lots of fighting. And this sentence in particular gives a good example of putting you into their shoes and making you feel things through the situation, and that's what really builds empathy through these stories. So it says, in the winter when the nights were long and the days were cold, life was especially hard. It kind of puts you into that winter frame of mind where you're living in your house, things are kind of long, and when you're fighting with your family members, you're stuck in the same place. So that's exactly what they talked about in this book. Yeah, those are just some of the things to look forward to.